would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Ashley. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Sam. I'm excited to be here.
I am actually very excited about this episode. I've been following you for a little while. I think you are probably one of my most favorite therapy slash religious trauma slash ex-Mormon Instagrams. I just think it's really cool. Like, and also
Wow, that's
you
like
just seem like a really normal human.
that is actually a really, really big compliment, Sam. So thank you. I'm gonna let that one like soak in because I don't give myself that credit, especially in the ex-Mormon space. I kind of feel like I'm not a good enough ex-Mormon, which is kind of plays into I never felt like a good enough Mormon. So it makes sense that I would feel that. So that is a really big compliment. Thank you.
Oh, you are so welcome. And I just it's such a weird space where that sort of like good version of us comes in. Hey, I'm sure that will come up in the conversation more. But for context, where in the world are you at the moment for people who don't know you?
Yeah, so actually I normally live in Cedar City, Utah, which is a little small town in southern Utah. It's actually where I was born and raised. But I'm currently in Dublin, California. I'm here for a brain spotting training, which is the form of therapy I specialize in. And so yeah, I'm in a hotel room and just excited to chat. I actually went to college in California. So I lived in California for 12 years. So it feels really nice to just be here. It kind of feels like home, even though I went to college in the South and Dublin's in the North, but same thing. It's just California.
Yeah, yeah. Your brain spotting work was actually, I'm pretty sure how I found your Instagram in the first place because I'm also a brain spotting therapist. And so I was like, it's so cool seeing other people work. Usually religious trauma therapists work with, IFS or EMDR or something like that. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so cool to find another brain spotting therapist in this space. So I love that.
I didn't realize that. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Oh my gosh. Brain spotting is so I have to just say brain spotting is what I'm really, really passionate about. I love this method of healing so much. And it is what led me into the religious trauma space. But I just feel like if you're a brain spotting therapist, you get it. So
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think from memory from some of your post brain spotting was a pretty big part of your own healing as well. So like I'm thinking we can have a chat about that later in the conversation as well.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
brain spotting is hugely supportive
Yeah.
to my own being. And
Yeah.
I that's also why I'm so passionate about it, you know?
Yeah. Amazing. So I like to start these episodes with a very broad, vague question, which is where does your story start?
That is a very broad, vague question.
Yes.
I mean, I will say, I guess it started in Cedar City, Utah. That's where I was born. And I grew up in an unorthodox Mormon home, actually. So my mom was a member of the church, and on my mom's side of the family, I have like Mormon pioneer ancestors,
Okay.
meaning my like great great grandfather settled parts of southern Utah. They had multiple wives, so that's like my mom's side of the family. And then my dad was not a member of the church and he was like an Italian Catholic. So it was a very interesting mix. Um, and
Yeah.
obviously like there's still a lot of similarities with the like patriarchy on both sides. But my mom was 3 months pregnant with me when she married my dad, and I'm the oldest in my family. So there's like also this layer of taboo and shame that I would say I came into the world with. Um, so that's where my story started, is in Cedar City, Utah, and I lived there for 18 years.
Yeah. Okay. Was that sort of like mixed faith family confusing as a child? Or was it just all you knew? Well, or
It
both?
was I think it was both, and it's
Yeah.
actually really fascinating. So I just want to say to listeners, as I talk about a lot of this stuff, I am going to talk about it from my therapist brain and my own
Yeah.
like deconstruction and healing because I have the language for it. So I did not necessarily have the
Yes.
language for it as a child, right? Obviously, but it was extremely confusing. It especially in Utah and especially in Mormon culture. So a huge part of Mormon culture is like the men having the priesthood, being a worthy member of the church. And if you don't have a worthy priesthood holder in your family, you are like immediately less than. So
Yeah.
that's just like a collective energy. Cedar City, Utah is also a fairly small town. So it's not like a big city. There's no diversity. Everyone's the same religion. Everybody knows everyone, right?
Yeah.
So I have two younger brothers, and it's interesting because as my brothers and I talk, we all have very different experiences growing up and in terms of our religion, right? But I was the oldest, so I think I'm obviously naturally more obedient, rule follower. But I remember, and I was young. I would have been like 5 years old because I remember the church building, and Mormon churches organized so well that like depending on where you live, you go to a certain church. And so obviously we hadn't yet moved to another part of town. But I remember sitting in either like a church meeting and just feeling that there was something less than. Like I was less than because my dad wasn't here, my dad wasn't worthy, you know. And I remember feeling that as a little tiny girl. And it's interesting because now I will credit the diversity of my family as to being why I could step away. Like it is why I was able to walk away from this religion.
Yeah.
But it was also something that was really challenging growing up because I wanted to be like everyone else. I mean, right? We all want that. We want to belong.
Yeah.
And I think obviously I didn't know at the time that I was just trying to fit in.
Yeah. I mean, what was that fitting in like? Was it hard or was there pressure to make friends with like really devout Mormon families to sort of like hype that up a little bit?
Well, I think that like everyone, it's so interesting. Majority of people are Mormon, and so that is
Yeah.
just your friend group. That's who you're around. And I think an interesting part of my story is that when I was 10, my dad was actually baptized a member of the church. But I actually will say that I don't think he was baptized because he genuinely believed.
Mm,
He was baptized because of the pressure of the community because right you go to church every Sunday and I think Mormon church does this well. I'm sure a lot of churches do this well, but I only really ever grew up in Mormon church where you just want to be a part of it. And when you're converting, you're like celebrated. It was like this very exciting time in my family's life.
mm,
And it's fascinating because my dad will now say that he got baptized for me. I don't remember that. Like, I don't remember asking and pushing that on him, but I could see how that would have been really important to me as a little girl, if that
mm.
makes sense.
How does that sit with you now, hearing that?
Uh, it's interesting. I think my dad and I have been through a lot in our relationship, but I understand. I have compassion and empathy because of I think maybe so much of the work I do and just understanding religious trauma and just understanding Mormon religious trauma specifically. But I get that. I get that's why he did it, you know? And to me, it tells me how much I wanted this and how much that is like taught to you to want this. And this is the only way you're gonna be with your family for forever. And so
Yeah.
I I think that at the time when it happened, I didn't realize how significant it was until, now looking back and
Yeah.
understanding it from a different lens.
Yeah. And that family unit in terms of like reaching what most people would call heaven, but like the celestial kingdom, like that's a real like pressure, right? Because if one person is not in there, then the whole family is separated, correct?
Correct. I believe you're correct. So I think this
Okay.
is where it gets really This is where it gets really problematic for me because
Yeah.
Mormon doctrine is interpreted differently by so
Yeah.
many people depending on how it's taught. A lot of families believe that. And then a lot of families believe me. I think a lot of families believe that like say if I am not a member, I won't be there, but the rest of my family will be. I just won't be with them.
Mm.
So that's more of my understanding that if like if my dad would have never gotten baptized, my parents were not married in the temple, then
Mm.
we wouldn't all be in the highest level of heaven together. But like say I had, then I would be there and they wouldn't be with them. So yes, it is like very much like separating families. But I think that in my understanding, that other doctrine of, well, if one person doesn't get baptized, then everyone can't be together is
Yeah.
actually just a twisted narration
Yeah.
that some families have adopted to like coerce and encourage people to stay in line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when we look at both of those, for little kids, they're both like really fear-based doctrines, right? Like, what was that like to internalize as a kid?
It's fascinating because I was a terrified child. Like I was so scared of everything. I was terrified of death.
Yeah.
I was terrified of people I didn't know. I was terrified of just like feeling things in my body. And it's fascinating because at the time I didn't know that's what it was. I thought and my parents unfortunately were young and they didn't know how to support my like little self and my nervous system, but now I'm like I actually think religion played a huge component in that. How could I not be scared? I'm going to a church that is, especially until I was 10 years old, is telling me that I'm not going to be with my parents forever in heaven. Like that is so confusing and that is so complicated. And it's interesting, Sam, I would say that's one of the most distressing things I see for many clients is that the way they interpreted this doctrine as children, because I think majority of families, there are Orthodox families, obviously, that are checking all the boxes and following all the rules, but most of us are very imperfect humans.
Mm.
Most of our families are diverse and complicated, and most of our families are not going to meet that mold. And so I think it just comes with this like level of distress and pressure as a kid that we shouldn't carry. I shouldn't have been worrying about that at 5 years old. I shouldn't have been worrying about that at 10 years old. I shouldn't have been like so worried about my dad getting baptized, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I will talk about my story and I go like, I gave my life to Jesus at the ripe old, well-informed developmental age of 12. And it's like, kids don't have the ability to comprehend that stuff. And, even in Pentecostal or evangelical Christianity, that idea of like, if you don't pray this prayer specifically, then you are going to be eternally separated from your family. Like anything fear-based is just like an insane thing to expect anybody, even adults, but particularly kids, to understand at the time. Um, could you recognize the fear at the time? Like, obviously, not necessarily by name, but like, did you recognize that you were afraid as a kid?
Yeah, I knew I was scared. I
Yeah,
don't know what I was scared of, but I
yeah,
was scared all the time, like
yeah,
all the time. I can pull it up in my body still of
yeah.
being scared and just feeling off. And I've done brain spotting sessions where I've actually like relived some stuff at church. And it's fascinating because I would have never connected, my initial thing to that. But it goes all the way back to just being a little girl and sitting in those meetings where you have leaders talking to you and people talking to you and they're like spewing these things from the pulpit that I just don't think are developmentally appropriate for a child,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Actually, did you do a story or an Instagram reel about that recently? I feel like I have memory of.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
I did make a reel on it because
yeah,
because I was like, this is insane.
yeah. Yeah,
You know?
that's one of the biggest things that I tell a lot of clients is that the ways that we see religious trauma show up is not in the way that we expect it to a lot of the time. It can be like completely wild, like and completely seemingly like not connected at all, and yet they're totally interconnected. So, yeah, it's wild.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one way that like I survive and so many people survive a high control religious setting is we just disconnect from our body and we stop listening to
Yeah.
those things that are happening inside of us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. What changed in your family when dad got baptized at 10?
So not much
Okay.
actually, because my dad, like I said, was not a
Yeah.
true believer,
Yeah.
but I have a very specific memory of him praying one night. My mom was gone and he was going to say a prayer and my middle brother started giggling like he thought it was funny because we've never seen my dad pray, right? Like you know?
Yeah.
And my dad got so upset, like so upset, right? Because it is like so vulnerable to pray.
Yeah.
And I was so distressed about that. And I like my little brother, I've asked him about it. He doesn't remember. Neither of my little brothers remember, but I do. And I don't know if it was that moment, but nothing really changed. We like aside from like everyone was so happy that my dad was baptized, and then my parents got married in the temple, in the Mormon temple.
Mm.
Um, the LDS temple. I was allowed to call it Mormon growing up, and now you're not
Yeah.
allowed to call it. So I go back and forth. I'm not trying to be disrespectful.
Yeah.
Um, but so no one can go to these weddings unless they're worthy members of the church and they have what's called temple recommend. When your parents get married after they've already been civilly married and they have children, there's a part of the temple ceremony that you can participate in as kids. So I
Oh.
do remember this. And my parents got married, and then we went into the sealing room
Mm.
where we all go like kneel down and pray. I don't rem It was a very surreal experience. I wouldn't like say it was necessarily traumatic, but you like walk into this setting, you see your parents, and there's like these people in the audience, which are like people from our community, and they're all like crying, and it's like this big like ceremonial thing. And so
Mm.
then you feel like you're supposed to cry. So I remember crying.
Yeah.
And that was really, really fascinating. But I think what happened is it freaked my dad out. The temple is very freaky, and
Yeah.
the things that go on are very inappropriate. And I think he was done after that. And I don't know if you've ever watched the documentary Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna probably get in a lot of trouble for saying this because the LDS Church and the FLDS Church, like
Yeah.
the LDS Church wants nothing to do with the FLDS Church. But in that documentary where they're kind of like the temple ceremonies kind of being discussed, it
Mm.
feels eerily similar to what happens in the LDS temple, except like the sexual abuse is not happening, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, this is so much the same. That's how I remember feeling in this environment, right? It's fascinating. So we did that. Like my parents got married in the temple, and you would think that we would have been this like pillar of the community, but my parents really weren't. When I was 14, we went on a cruise, and like we went on a cruise with a bunch of people from the community, and my parents were like drinking with other people. And so
Mm.
they very much were not abiding by the rules of the
Yeah.
church.
And in a environment where almost like sameness is celebrated, like that conformity of everybody is the same, believes the same, does the same, doing different, I imagine would not have gone down well with certain people in that community.
Yeah, no, on that cruise, I was sitting next to another family who was very LDS, and the dad looks at, we were like out at you, if you've been on a cruise, you sit at tables, right? Like, tables at dinner. And I was at the table with this family. My parents were at another table, and this Mormon man looks over and he points to my parents and he says, "You never want to be like that." About my own parents to me.
Oh.
I was like 14 years old. And it's interesting because I felt like ashamed of my parents, but also disgust at this man. It's like just such a
Mm.
confusing thing to hold on to as a kid,
Yeah.
And I was 14, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you
I
have
think that was
recognition of why he was saying that at the time? Or did you just think he was being an asshole?
I think he was judging my parents. I
Yeah.
also now looking back and understanding so much of people, I think he was jealous. I think
Yeah.
he was like activated that he couldn't go be that,
Yeah.
you know? I
Yeah.
think we are so quick to judge someone when they're hitting a mirror within ourselves, right? And I see this a lot for people in high control religion and Mormonism specifically is it's so much easier to make the people who are leaving the problem than it is to sit with what are they stirring up in you.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Perhaps my parents represented a freedom to him. That's what I think. That's what I
Yeah.
suspect.
Yeah. So, in amongst all of this, like, because obviously, I like to ask the question because usually it typically changes for a lot of my guests. So, I like to mirror this question a little bit. But, as a kid and as a young teenager, who was God to you? Like, was that something that was just your family connection, or was that something that felt personal for you as a kid?
It's a good question. I think God growing up was like the Mormon God and like
Mm,
Jesus and the images like that I saw of this
yeah,
person growing up. I remember like praying a lot as a child, and I remember telling God that I hated him when like something bad happened to
yeah,
me, or anytime I felt an emotion or feeling that I wasn't quote unquote supposed to feel
yeah,
or frustrated. Um, but that's who I think I would have envisioned
mm,
that person to be as a kid.
yeah. Did you feel like is it like common to have a personal relationship with God?
I I believe so. Yes, I mean like so I mean I remember praying every night and saying, "Dear
Mm,
Heavenly Father, thank you for
mm,
this day." Like, talking to him about various things.
mm,
I will still find myself like if I can't sleep at night, I will
mm.
like almost turn on my side and I will start saying that prayer out loud.
Yeah.
Or like in my head. And I'm like, "Whoa, whoa," and because it was like a coping skill,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
For
It's almost
everything.
automatic, I think, sometimes to just
Yeah.
start praying in different situations that you would have normally or used to do. It's yeah. It some of my clients go, "Why do I do that?" And I go, "Well, why wouldn't you in some ways?" But
Yeah.
I mean, you sort of said that like you remember feeling really angry towards God. Was that something that you were allowed to feel, or was that something that you then felt guilty for feeling?
Oh, absolutely feel guilty for
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely not allowed. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't even know where that came from, but I remember doing it. Like I remember letting it out because I think growing up, you're told like this higher power is responsible for everything that's happening. And so when things were happening I didn't like, I was like mad,
Yeah.
But it was only by myself, only in my room. No, like no one ever heard me say that. That was a
Okay.
very private.
Okay. And so, I mean, I like to ask this of all of my guests who grew up and were socialized as female. Good old-fashioned purity culture. What was that like as a teenager?
That's a great question. I think a really important part of my story personally is that when I was like 3 or 4 years old, I was sexually abused by an older uncle. He was probably like 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
And so, again, a lot of this understanding has come
Mm,
like post my own therapy and deconstruction, but now knowing the impact it had on me. And then coupled with growing up in a purity culture like Mormonism, I think it was extremely distressing to my nervous system. So I know for like every sexual abuse survivor has just different symptoms and presentation. So for myself personally, I was very sexual early on, like very sexually curious, I will say. So I remember being like 5, 6 years old, like fascinated with like kissing on TV and like
yeah.
love stories and things like that. So I was very sexually curious. And then by the time I hit puberty and everything got fully turned on,
Mm,
I all I wanted to do was kiss boys. I
mm,
wanted to do inappropriate things with boys. Like I was so curious. And I now know that that was sexual, like age appropriate sexual development and partly also probably having my sex parts turn on at an early age because
mm,
of just like the invasion of what happened. But it was so incredibly distressing, Sam. I mean, to the point that I think I had purity culture shame all the way up until my early 20s. But what would happen is I would like get myself into situations with the opposite sex where I think sometimes I wanted to do the things that I wanted, like whether that be like touching or whatever. And then I would feel intense amounts of shame for it. So I would just like cycle. And my freshman year of high school, like prior to my freshman year of high school, I only had let a boy touch my boobs. Hopefully I can say that on here.
yeah.
And that was obviously distressing in and of itself because like I'm not supposed to do that, right? And then my
Yeah.
freshman year, I dated this guy who was older. He was 17. He was 17 and I was 14.
Mm,
And fortunately, nothing sexual ever happened with him. He was a very righteous Mormon male. He definitely groomed me and was like talking about marrying me and all of those things. But he broke up with me and like broke my heart. Well, then I kind of was like free and dating, and I had a boyfriend who wasn't Mormon, and we did things, and not intercourse. I hadn't had intercourse at that point, but then I had a lot of friends who were LDS, and my friends found out, and they were like, "You have to go to your bishop. You have to go confess the sin and repent because what you did was bad, essentially, right?" And so I did. At 15 years old, I confessed to my bishop, who was my childhood friend's dad. He was also my neighbor. I had spent time at his house. I still to this day run into him in the town I live in. He's like friends with my husband. Like it is so fucking complicated and complex. Like that's a recipe for trauma, right? Anyway, so I go and talk to this man who I will say is a really good man, and he had no intention of harming me. Like he was just doing what he was supposed to do, right? And I actually have read horrific stories of bishop interviews and invasive questions. Mine was not like that, whatever, whatsoever. I confessed, I told him what I did.
Mm.
Obviously, he gave me a punishment, which was that I couldn't take the sacrament in church for 2 weeks, and I had to read certain scriptures or whatever. And that was it. I don't remember really anything else from the meeting. I do remember the first sacrament when I passed on the sacrament and didn't take it. And my dad looked at me and he was like, "What did you do?" And I
Yeah,
just
I
like
mean, that just to me sounds like a
flooded.
recipe for like public humiliation.
That's what it was. I was
Yeah.
flooded with shame, and this is what I did. I said I will never ever confess ever again. So
Mm.
what was the consequence of that? I never talked about anything sexual with anyone ever again. And
Yeah.
I needed to be talking with people. I needed to feel safe to come forward to share, hey, this is what's happening. I keep doing this and I don't want to keep doing this, but I do want to keep doing this, right? It was just like so much confusion that I just shoved in and
Yeah.
didn't tell anyone. And I think on the surface, I looked like I had it all together. If you went to high school with me, people would tell you that. I think even now to this day, like I would represent that, but it was it was really brutal. And then my fast forward to my senior year, that same 17-year-old boy who had kind of groomed me, he was on his mission at the time. And I had found out he had been writing to girl. He'd been writing me and another girl, and he'd been sending us the same like letters. And so we called him out, like, hey, you can't do that. That's like gross.
Yeah.
And I will never forget the email he sent me. He basically slut shamed me in the email. He like listed all the men I'd supposedly had sex with, all the boys that I had sex with, and that he couldn't believe I was not pregnant and I should be ashamed of myself. And I was 17, and I remember reading the email and like again, another flood of shame, another wave of shame of just like hating myself so bad. And when I think about that email now, unfortunately, I had enough protective factors, but it like that's the type of email people take their own lives over,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So purity culture was really rough, and I would say it's the thing that impacted me the most
Yeah.
from growing up
Yeah.
Mormon, and then it proceeded into college, and then even after I had babies, I've had some sexual trauma related to purity culture show up too.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest, well, one of, I mean, there's a lot of purity culture myths, but one of the myths is that it just like once you actually like get married or you start having sex or, you leave the beliefs behind, that somehow it just magically goes away, which is like the biggest load of bullshit. Like I was saying to a couple of people who work in this space as well the other day that like still to this day, like there is absolutely no chance of me using a tampon. Like it is just like absolutely not happening. And so it's like things like that that people don't understand, like impact people's bodies, particularly women's bodies, in regards to purity culture that last far longer than, the first like, 6 years of teenagehood or whatever it is. But I mean, you sort of said that purity culture was pretty rough, and I feel like that might be a pretty palatable way of describing it based on what you just said. Because it sounds fucking awful.
It was. And I grew up in a small town too. So like rumors
Yeah.
flew, people talked about
Yeah.
you, like very, very, very like scarlet lettery, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, I was so wish I could go back and just like be right there with teenage me with the knowledge and insight I have now because oh, she deserves so much better, but she didn't see it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what? like, what did you feel like that was at the time? Because I imagine you didn't have the language of shame. Like, what did you feel like at the time?
I mean, I literally just hated myself, Sam. Like that's all I can say. And it's interesting because I think that that thread of self-hate
Mm,
is still one I am pulling the strings on. But I
mm,
think this is so real about religion, though, or like Mormonism in and
mm,
of itself. When I was living all of this, right, 17 years old, I never once blamed the church. Never once. I never was like, they're the problem. These messages are the problem. Do you know who I blamed? I blamed myself. I'm the problem. There's something a matter with me. Why can't I follow these rules? Why am I not the good Mormon girl? Why am I curious? Why do I want to do bad things? And I mean, that's how I was. I'm a very curious human being
yeah.
and I'm a very open human being. So I remember in high school being so curious about the boys that drank on the weekends. I'm like, oh, why are they doing that? Like I wanted to know. Well, that kind of sounds fun, right? But
Mm,
that's a no, no, you can't do that. You know, and so it was this constant like, who was the problem? I was a problem.
yeah.
I never once blamed the religion ever.
Yeah.
I don't think I fully understood the way the religion impacted me until literally the last like 6, 7 years, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you are so conditioned to not blame them though, right? Like it is never the
Yes.
church's fault. So I think it's one of the biggest, like laying the responsibility where it lies is such a powerful moment, but it is the moment I think that takes sometimes the longest because you are just so conditioned to not blame the church. It's not the church's fault, never is, right?
No, I just wanted to be like them, right? Like I just wanted to be like them. And now I can say like I am so grateful that I didn't follow that path. Like I'm so grateful I didn't follow that path because I very easily could have, but fortunately I didn't. Unlike so many people I work with, so many people never had the choices that I had. And
Yeah,
I I'm so grateful for my choices and
yeah,
opportunities.
yeah. How did that shame as a young person impact your ability to form relationships with people, even just like friendships or connect with people in your family, that sort of thing?
Oh, I mean, I'm thinking about my family relationships, and I feel like my family in general has a lot of shame, not even related to the church. But I would say I was very trepidatious. Like I didn't have a large group of friends, and I moved away to college when I was 18. Fortunately, I left Utah and moved to California, and it took me a long time to make friends, and I didn't have a huge friend group. I had a small group of friends, but I think I was always constantly worried, like they're judging me. Like I would actually push people away more than they would actually do anything to be pushed away. But I think I was always scared of their judgment or perception of me when really the only one judging me was me, right? Um, and I think it definitely like impacted. I mean, I had such low self-worth, and I had decided that the only way I was worthy, right, is if a man loved me or wanted me or needed me or wanted sex from me, right? So
Yeah,
that had been like conditioned from a very young age. And then I think when I left Mormonism at 20, I still hadn't like unpacked any of this. So I was still getting myself in very like precarious situations with men. And I was hating myself less, but I was still hating myself. So
yeah.
again, right, just because you leave doesn't mean that it changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a 2-year window, it sounds like, between when you went to college and when you decided to leave Mormonism. What happened in that 2 years to get to that point?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. So I left Cedar City when I was 18. I actually didn't have a choice. My parents said I had to move away for college anywhere,
Huh?
and I will forever
Is that
thank them.
uncommon? Like, I would expect, like,
I don't think that's not like in Utah, it's kind of like the expectation is you get married. And so
yeah.
and so yeah, I was not what I did was not the norm at
No,
all.
right, okay. Because I'm thinking,
Not
like, it's not even the norm for, I think, girls in high control religion to even go to college, let alone to go away to college, where, like, there's so many unknown factors. And
and
so,
that's why I tell you, Sam, like my unorthodox family, I will credit them forever. I didn't grow up with like high control modesty. Like I could wear whatever I wanted. I never felt shamed for the clothes I wore, right? Whereas I know so many people did. I mean, I had a very diverse family. I had a ton of family that weren't LDS. So I had seen like, I'd seen the world outside of Utah very well before I turned 18. So yeah, I didn't have a choice. I had to move out of Utah, or I had to move out of Cedar City. I didn't have to move out of Utah, but I had to move away for college for at least 1 year. And I grew up going to Southern California. My grandma lived in Southern California. My dad's mom, who was and is, she's not Mormon. And I had an uncle who had a house there, so I like loved Southern California. My aunt was like, "You should apply to schools here." So I did, and I got into a little college called Loyola Marymount University on the coast of California in Los Angeles, and I moved to Los Angeles when I was 18. So I went from small town Utah to Los Angeles. Fortunately, I was on a really small campus. Um, but it was interesting because I mean, like 18 years old, you're trying to figure out your identity, and my entire identity had been molded by this community in which I grew up. And I made really good friends, and they just loved me, Sam. They loved that I was like Mormon, but they loved that I didn't follow the rules, and they just loved me for who I was. And
Yeah.
I'm a girl's girl. I'm fun. I like to get ready. I like to hang out. Like, it's just who I am. And so I kind of just became friends with some really good people. But the problem was I would make these choices on the weekends, and then I'd like hate myself because I wasn't following the rules of church. So I was still trying. It was like I was like half in, half out. I had a boyfriend who I had met my freshman year of college. I went home to Cedar City, and I met him at a party, and I knew he was Mormon, but I was like, "Oh, he's at this party, he's drinking, like it's okay. Like I can date him."
Yeah.
That was my rubric for dating. Really, really great, right?
Loose kind of moments.
And there should have been some red flags. And he's like, I will say, like, is a really great guy. Like, I
Yeah.
can't say anything bad about him. But first of all, I was 18 years old. He would have been like 21, 22, because he had gone on a mission. And we were in like I was in no place to get married, but that's obviously like as soon as you start dating someone, that's what you start talking about because it's so much in the culture there.
Yeah.
Mind you, I live in Los Angeles. I'm going to college, right? And because the town I live in is so small, the other guy from high school that had slut shamed me was friends with this guy and was like, "You can't date her. She's like slutty." And then he broke up with me. I mean, it was like a whole thing, but then we kept kind of dating. Anyways, long story short, the summer of my freshman year, I was going to come home and get married, Sam. Like I was going to come home and
Mhm.
get married to this kid. And my friends were like, "Ash, you cannot do that. People don't do that in real life. Like that's not how the real world works." Like I tell you, I have great
Yeah.
friends. Like actually my best friend, one of my best friends, he married my husband and I remember we were on a run specifically and he stopped and he was like, "This is crazy. You are not going home and you are not getting married." And
Yeah.
I will forever be thankful for that. I actually really like people who are upfront with me and tell me how they feel because I don't like to read like the passiveness and the not like clear and direct. So, anyways, I also had an aunt, my aunt who I'm really close with as well, who I had grown up with, who's not LDS. She's like, "You're not going home and doing that. That is stupid." My parents didn't want me to do it.
Yeah.
So I didn't come home, but I kept dating this guy. So I like was like kind of still having these ties. And the interesting part about this is he wanted to do everything sexually but have sex. And
Yep.
I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, we're doing all the things. I actually prefer to have sex than to do some of this other weird shit. So, like, we were always kind of in conflict about that.
Yeah.
And so then we did end up having sex. And I think then he really felt like he had to marry me.
Yeah.
Right. And he'd given that away to me or whatever. And I was just really not in a good spot to be in having a boyfriend. I'm just going to be straight up about that. I'm not going to say that I did not treat him well in the sense I didn't have any respect for myself. Do you think I had a respect for this relationship? Right? Like it was a really toxic situation. Meanwhile, Prop 8 is happening in California when they're voting to like the church is supporting, Prop 8 and not for gay marriage. And I have a girl in my class and she has two dads, and I'm like listening to her talk. I'm so invested in that. So there's just so much happening. This relationship's happening, Prop 8's happening. And then I remember getting upset with him about it. Like, how can we be a part of this church? I don't understand. And then the ward there, the church that I was like in LA, emailed me to have a celebration for Prop 8 not passing or whatever it was, whatever the decision was. And I was so disgusted, Sam. I could not imagine going to celebrate this girl in my class's like pain. I just couldn't. I couldn't imagine. And so that was it for me. And I did not go back to church after that day.
Yeah. Up until that point, what was it like trying to almost like straddle and live in two worlds? Because
I
like
mean,
it's exhausting. I know like for me trying to be like queer and straight and like not it's hard.
I don't think I realized it at the time, obviously,
Yeah.
but like looking back at myself in college and what I was going through and my mental health and my choices and decisions and just everything, I was a wreck. I
Yeah.
was a complete wreck. And again, I don't even think my college friends would tell you I was a wreck though, because I was just so good at being perfect and looking put together and having my shit together and checking all the boxes. But internally, I was really struggling. I think that was when I felt the most oppressed and the probably the closest I would have ever said to like not wanting to be alive, but it all just, that combination of shame and wanting to be a part of something but not wanting to be a part of something at all. I just don't think I knew how to break free.
Yeah.
I
And
think
it's
Prop 8 gave me
confusing.
permission to. I think Prop 8 was like, "Yep, you can be done now." Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you feel like that external permission was something that you were waiting for in a like subconsciously?
I don't know. Perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps I just needed them to do something egregious so I could be like,
Mm.
"Fuck
Like
you,"
something
essentially.
you can't make sense of it. Like that part where you go, actually, I can't play those mental gymnastics anymore.
Yeah, because I wasn't following any of the rules. Like, let's be
Yeah.
honest, not following any of the rules. I had read the entire book of Mormon, but I
Yeah.
was like, I don't really like, I just think this is a book. Like, I didn't even ever believe it. I can't tell, did I bear my testimony that I believed it at times growing up? Yes, but
Mm.
I cannot say to you that I ever really believed it. I
Yeah.
wanted to. I desperately wanted to. I wanted to feel what I thought everyone else had around me, but I don't actually think I ever did.
Yeah. And that's, I think some people would think, oh, well, that's really easy to exist in that space, like not really believing it. But actually, that's really fucking hard,
Yeah.
right? Like to be so desperately wanting the thing that you are supposed to be able to have and to want is really, really painful and automatically just makes you feel like there's something wrong with you, I would assume.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think the glimmer of like light and hope came from my friends in
Yeah.
California. And it's interesting because at the time, I thought I was like a wreck in college and in doing so much inner work, I actually like there's so much light in that time because I had all of these people who just loved me. Like they truly loved me unconditionally. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever felt that because I didn't feel that in my home. I didn't feel that in my community or in my church or even with my friends in my hometown, right?
Yeah.
But with these people, I mean, there's my closest, dearest friends to this day, they just loved me like unconditionally. I have my best friend who was my roommate all 4 years of college who saw me through all of this. I could just send her a text about anything and I just know
Yeah.
that it won't matter. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a
And in a,
gift.
I mean, in a space of like conditions and rules and conditional belonging and love, I imagine that would have felt intoxicating.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there is this like opinion in people who, I mean, I hear this a lot in people who don't necessarily understand the gravity of religious trauma. But from the moment where you were like, actually, I'm done with this, I think there is this belief that, great, like you're good to go now, right? It doesn't quite work right like that, though. So, what was that like for you? Because that period of time can be just as destabilizing and disorienting as the times while you are trying to straddle both worlds, right?
Yeah, it's actually really, really interesting, Sam, because I don't know if maybe I did some of this when I was like 18 to 20 already, if I'd already kind of been in that really destabilizing place.
Yeah.
Because when I was done, I was done. And I
Okay.
did not miss Mormonism
Mm,
whatsoever. And I'm not saying, can I see its impact on my choices and my decisions that I made?
yeah.
Absolutely, but it was not in the forefront of my mind. I didn't miss my faith because I didn't have a faith, if I'm being quite honest with you.
Yeah.
And in 2012, so 2 years, no, 4 years later, I
Mm,
ended up getting my records removed. And then when I removed my records in 2012, it was the year I became a therapist, and I was like, I am never going to think about this religion ever again. And I genuinely did not until I moved back to Utah. And it's like one of those things, right? I think because I was in California, because I had no one in my immediate support group was Mormon. My parents were no longer Mormon at the time. My brothers weren't. Like I had no Mormonism had no influence on me whatsoever. So I just got to from 2008 until 2018. So for a decade, I just lived my life in California. Didn't think about it at all, which I am not I think that it was suppressed in my nervous system. I know it was, but I didn't need to, I wasn't activated by it,
yeah.
consciously.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what did that decade look like and feel like for you? Were you able to feel a sense of freedom and liberation that you hadn't before?
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. I like some of the best time in my life. I got into kind of now in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I know why I got in this abusive relationship. And my first guy that I dated that wasn't Mormon, he was not a healthy relationship. And at the time, I was like, why did I get in this relationship? And I'm like, oh, now I know. But it
Mm.
was still so cool to date someone who was not Mormon, who had like a family that wasn't a part of this high control group. So I dated him like the end of college, beginning of grad school, but then we broke up. And that was my first year of grad school. And I lived in San Diego. I had moved to San Diego, and I read The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And I like finally had the language for shame. I'd never been able to name shame before I read that book. Had no idea what shame was until I read that book. And then I was like, oh, this is what I had been going through. And I think I almost decided at that time, like, no more. You're not going to shame yourself anymore. And so I just started being really vulnerable and authentic. And I actually wrote a blog. I kind of just forgot about it until this moment. Like I called it like 52 Leaves. And every week I did something new to get out of my comfort zone. And it turned out to be, I'm like, I need to go look this up. I
I
could
love
probably still
that.
on the internet somewhere, but I would turn a new leaf and do something new every single week and get out of my comfort zone. And I did that for a whole year. Well, the most magical part of this story is that summer, in 2012, before I had my records removed, but I met my husband. So
Mm.
I went out to a bar. At this point, I felt no guilt for going to bars. I mean, I was living my best life, Sam. I was like free.
Love
I
it.
was experiencing my 20s how every single 20-year-old should experience their 20s, right? But my girlfriends at the time, my grad school girlfriends were like, we need to go out to this bar. And I was like, well, I'd moved all day. And I was like, fine, it's our last time. It's our last hurrah.
Yeah.
Went to this bar. My husband came up to me because another guy was talking to me, and he was like, "You look like you need to be saved." And I was like, "By you? Yes, of course, right?" So
Yeah.
we started talking, and then he tells me he's 22. Mind you, I'm 24, and I'm like, "This is going nowhere. You are so young." Had the night of my life, and now we've been married. We've been together 13 years, married 9. But like, I don't think I could have ever felt open and curious to that relationship had the past year not happened. Of like just really diving into my own soul and facing my own demons.
Yeah.
And it's funny because you would think I would have faced Mormonism, but remember, I didn't blame Mormonism. I
Yeah.
blamed myself, right? So the relationship I had to rebuild was with myself. And I think that was a really big gift for me. I didn't have to deconstruct a religion because I don't think I ever really believed it. which is, I know, super unique. I know a lot of people's faith deconstruction does not look like this.
Yeah, but I think there is a lot of people from, that I've talked to on the podcast, but also just like people I connect with, on good old-fashioned Instagram, and things like that, thought that it was this devout faith, but actually, upon deconstructing it, found that actually there was no gravity to that. There was no depth to that. And so I think a lot of people are realizing as well that potentially what they thought was this faith was not. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's also not. And so that's what I love about this podcast is because it will speak to someone whose experience was similar, and not everybody has that devout faith, personal relationship with God sort of story. But I do want to ask, moving into like for you starting to get to know your now husband, where did you see all of the like the sexual purity culture trauma pop up and rear its head in that space? Because that's just complicated, right?
Yeah, it's so, like I said earlier, I've always been a very sexual being, and
Yeah.
I'm a very sexual person. And my husband was the first person that I had ever been honest with about my sexual abuse, but also my sexual history,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, he's just such an incredible man. I will tell you, like, our like second, like, I knew that I was in love with him when he played me. I remember when Macklemore dropped Same Love, and my husband played that song for me, and I was like, oh,
We're
you're
good.
my, we're good. We're good. But we'd only been dating maybe like 3 weeks or something. I don't know. I need to look up the release date. But
Yeah.
it's so fascinating because I never had any sexual issues
Yeah.
with him in the time we were dating before we got married. I think again, it was like I was finally allowed to be free and I could explore all of these things with him. My husband's also very sexual, so we were very compatible in that way, but it was a very safe relationship,
Yeah.
right? There was so much safety and there was no judgment and there was no criticism and there was no expectations. And it was very loving. So I had this ability to be free and to own my sexuality in a way I never had before. And it stayed like that for a very long time until we had kids. And I think, what often happens, right? So after women give birth, if they have obviously any type of trauma, but if you have sexual trauma specifically, it can get reignited, right? That the nervous system remembers, it knows. And so after giving birth, I had some very interesting things kind of come up in the sense of I would get super activated at all if my husband asked for sex, wanted sex, like any type of sexual things. And it was like almost I became very controlling about it.
Yeah.
I became very rigid and not, and I still have these moments of being hypersexual, right? And it wasn't until brain spotting and doing some internal work, and I had had a second baby at this point,
Yeah.
and I went through some pretty significant postpartum with him, but that I started to realize, oh my gosh, some of this is my own sexual trauma, but some of this is like purity culture trauma. And I had this insight one day, and I swear I had it about a year ago, and it has shifted everything. I had this insight that my husband didn't grow up in a high control purity culture. So he has none of that conditioning, none of that programming. So him wanting to have sex or like being sexual, one doesn't mean he expects it from me, but that's just him expressing himself. And I
Yeah.
had this insight of like, that is so activating to me because I don't feel like I can do that. I
Yeah.
was never allowed to be a sexual being. I was never allowed to be like, hey, can you get me off right now? Right? Like
Yeah.
that was a huge no-no. Masturbation was a huge no-no, like all of this stuff. And it was so interesting. And I couldn't make sense of it. I'm like, why is this coming up now? Like, I just had like a decade of sexual freedom. Why is
Yeah.
this coming up now? Like, why can't I? And I've had to like reconcile. I've had a lot of grief come up with that too. Like, this never happened for, you know, 10, 11 years. And now here it is. And
Yeah.
It's been really healing though, because now I have no activation at all when he asks for it. Cause I know I'm like, oh, well, yeah, you're sexual. I'm not really feeling sexual. It's fine. And like, then I can ask for it. And it's been really cool. But I
Mm.
would say it's wild how it still shows up. Like,
Yeah.
how, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. But and I almost want you to repeat it again for people who don't think that like you can heal from purity culture and sexual trauma in the words that you said, which is that you don't have any activation.
I don't. I literally
Yeah.
don't have activation about my own sexual trauma and my own like stuff.
Yeah.
But when it comes to my partner and him asking for sex,
Yeah.
when I tell you it would spin me up, Sam, and like we would get in a huge fight and he then stopped asking. I like poor guy, bless his heart. Like he was just trying to be a good partner. And I've apologized. I've said like I'm so sorry, honey. I had no idea that what was underneath it. I had no idea why I was getting so mad at you. And it was me. It was my own shame. It was my own dysregulation. And that's been so empowering too to
Yeah.
be like, this has nothing to do with you. You're a great man and you're allowed to want sex. Like you are allowed to want it. That doesn't mean I have to give you it, but you are allowed to want it,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
So am I.
Hmm.
And it's been really freeing. It's been really fun too.
Yeah.
Because I think like while I had that time with him that was very safe and very free, I think there was still all this stuff repressed. And so now I'm like, that was fun, but this is next level.
Yeah, I mean, my instinct is to like almost ask what might feel like a really inappropriate question, which is, I imagine the sex is wildly better. Like,
Wildly. Like,
yeah,
and obviously I've had the same partner for 13 years, so we
yeah,
really know each other's bodies. But I mean, I'm 37. And I'm like, and my hormones are not what they used to be, but damn, the sex is so good. It is
yeah,
so good. And I feel no shame. And you know what else my husband and I can talk about like sexual fantasies. We can talk about all types of things. Like I have no fear of him cheating. I have no insecurities about him thinking another woman is attractive or me thinking another male is attractive or me thinking another woman's attractive, right? Like it's just this open curiosity
yeah,
and love that just really fuels your sex life to be incredible.
yeah. Secure attachment is nice, right?
Oh my God. Yes. Yes. And I feel like it's taken so long to get there, you
Yeah.
know?
Okay, I want to ask about a sort of like a dual question of like, what was it like to get your records removed? Because I know for some
Uh-huh.
people that can be like a really big moment, and other people it's just ticking a box. But also, when did you start blaming the Mormon Church? And what was that like?
When did I start blaming them?
No, when? Yeah, and like, how did
Yeah.
that happen? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so in 2012 when I got my records removed, to be honest, the catalyst was it where it was my now husband. We were on a date, like our first date, and he asked me, because obviously I'm from Utah, and if you're from Utah, everyone's like, "Oh, are you Mormon?" You know, that's what everyone
Yep.
says. And so of course he asked me, and I was like, and I had told him I was raised Mormon, and his response, he was like, "You were raised Mormon?" Like almost like I can't, like, whoa. And I remember thinking in my head,
Um,
oh my gosh, me being raised Mormon means I'm not gonna end up with this really good guy, and he's like such a good guy, you know?
yeah.
And I was, but I don't believe it. I haven't practiced it, whatever. So I don't know if that was kind of like, oh, I really want to cut ties with it. But I was also a therapist. I had just become a therapist. I was working with at-risk youth in San Diego. And like the Mormon church drops new rules twice a year in their conferences. And there had just another thing had come out for same-sex couples and their kids, and just another marginalization. And so I decided to take steps to remove it. And it actually took me like 6 months because it was before you had to get things notarized and the Mormon churches ran like a business. So I submitted my letter. And then based on my address in San Diego, they placed me with a bishop. So who would have been in charge of whose ward I would have been and whose church I would have been in.
Yeah.
And he emailed me, and I'll never forget the email he sent me. Because it had my work signature on it, and he said, I would imagine that someone in your position wouldn't find a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I was so pissed. Like at this point, I was like really social justicey. I was a
Yeah.
therapist. I worked with inner city kids in San Diego. Like, you're not gonna fuck with me, dude, if you think that I like care. And he kept calling me sister because that's what they do in the Mormon church. And I refused to call him bishop. I would just say Mr. Mr. And we went back and forth like probably 6 times. He asked me to come to his house for dinner. I wouldn't. It's just like there's no respect for boundaries of like, I'm done. Please grant me, please grant me. And then he finally did. He finally granted it for me. And I was done. And again, I never thought about it until I moved back to Utah.
Mm.
And it's so funny. I've now since the only repercussion I had, which wasn't a repercussion, is my mom was a little weirded out. She just didn't understand why I'd have my records removed.
Yeah.
And my mom is the only person in my family that hasn't had her records removed. But at the time, I think she's still, I mean, she's not like this at all now, but I think at the time she was still kind of reconciling it. But remember, like my mom's family is Mormon
Generational.
pioneer
Yeah.
lineage, and my grandma, my mom's mom, she doesn't practice it, she doesn't follow it, she doesn't follow any of the rules, but she still believes in it. She still wants to be buried in her temple of clothing because she thinks she's done it all. Like it's really in there.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, again, I didn't think about Mormonism until I moved back in 2018 to small town Utah. And that was for me when I started to think about, oh, this is really impacting mental health in this community. But I didn't start working with the population until 2012 because I worked at a residential treatment facility, and residential treatment facilities work with out-of-state kids. They don't work with in-state kids. Um, but I attended a Mormon baptism for one of my cousins about a year into living in Utah, and it was my first time in a Mormon church since
Mm.
2008, since I'd become a therapist, since I had my records removed. And I remember sitting there, and my husband, who's never been to a Mormon church besides this, he was like, "What the actual fuck is going on?" Because it's like a Mormon baptism, and they're like these adults talking to eight-year-old kids about how if they sin again, then they're gonna have to go repent. Like it's just, I mean, this really harsh language. And I remember like looking around and thinking, this is not funny, but I'm like laughing because I was like, this is wild.
Mm.
This is psychological and emotional abuse of these
Yeah.
children. That was like the first thought in my head. The language, the rhetoric, and I can't even give you a specific example, but it was just like the delivery, the way these adults were talking to the kids, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And that kind of like got my wheels turning and I just started paying attention. I had my first son that year and I took time off work and I kind of went down a rabbit hole of sexual abuse cover-ups in the Mormon church. And then that got really deep. And then I just like kind of tucked it away and just lived my life in Utah. And I had my second baby. Prior to when I was 9 months pregnant, my dad had an affair. It came out my dad had been having an affair. My parents got a divorce. And mind you, they'd been married for 33 years. So that was like a really tumultuous time in my life. I was not thinking about the Mormon church at all.
Yeah.
Right. Um, and I was seeing clients virtually in California and I was doing some like other work, but I really only had a handful of Utah clients. And I got really severe postpartum depression after my second baby. And that's also kind of how I found brain spotting because my really close friend, colleague had gotten trained in it. And she's like, Ash, you need to look into a brain spotting therapist because she knew I was really struggling. And so I found a brain spotting therapist. This was like at the like August of 21, but I didn't start doing really real brain spotting work until 22 because she was like kind of new in brain spotting and she didn't know how stable I was, right? So once I stabilized in January of 22, like I went on meds and everything, and I got like my meds kicked in pretty quickly. So I did stabilize really quickly, fortunately,
Yeah.
and started to treat my symptoms. And I was like, whoa, I'd done talk therapy on and off for 10 years. And then I did my first brain spotting session. I was like, this is unlike anything I've ever done,
Yeah.
right? Just understanding the sensations in my body. And then like 2 months later, I had the opportunity to do a brain spotting training myself. And I had been a talk therapist for 10 years,
Yeah.
right? And I'd kind of done a little bit of advocacy in 2019, talking more openly about the Mormon church, just in the sexual abuse stuff, but I had no idea that it would turn into what it turned into today. So
Yeah.
in 2022, I got trained in brain spotting, and I again was just going to do virtual work, but I just felt like, okay, well, with this expertise and training, I'll open a practice in Cedar City. So I did open a practice. And that is when I started to blame the Mormon church. It was that was the moment where everything kind of was like, what the actual fuck is going on here? Because there wasn't one client that I had on my caseload that was not impacted by the culture. And not all of them were members of the church, Sam. Not all of them were. But because it's so dense in Utah, you can't escape it. And so it impacts everything, right? And you're a brain spotting practitioner. I was watching people relive trauma in front of me. And
Yeah.
because I'm so familiar with Mormon culture, right? I'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
that's that's what it's like in sacrament meeting. Oh, that's what it's like when your bishop asks you those inappropriate questions. Oh, that's what it's like when you go through the Mormon temple. Like I was able to know what was coming up in the sessions because of my experience. And that's when I really started to blame the church.
Yeah. I mean, what impact did that have on you to be able to start to shift the responsibility from this was always mine to carry to this was never mine to carry?
I think, like it's so interesting because had I never moved back to Utah, I don't know if any of those things would have been activated
Yeah.
within my being base. I don't know if I would have ever faced my own religious trauma had I not been confronted with it,
Yeah.
right? But I think it's so fascinating because it's allowed me to just understand so much, even my own sexual abuse, like even to understand why the conditions that allowed that to happen and how I'm not saying that was all on the church,
Yeah.
but how it does have roots in Mormonism and Mormon history, right?
Yeah.
This uncle is on my mom's side of the family. I think it's highly likely he was abused. Like, right? We come from a culture where sexual abuse has been normalized, right? And so it's like just to even have that layer of understanding for my own self, and then to know that purity culture in and of itself is a form of sexual abuse. It was just like I think it was like this last piece of freedom I didn't even know that I needed. And then it's been so cool because I do believe that I was so far I had done so much of my own healing
Mm.
and inner work that's what allows me to show up for clients in the way that I do because I'm not doing the work with them, right? Like I have done some of my own work since, obviously, but I'm pretty grounded in my own spirituality and my own identity and my own deconstruction prior to opening this practice that it just it just kind of I think it was exactly what needed to happen.
Yeah.
And this is gonna sound crazy, but I think I hated the Mormon church in 2012. Like I hated them.
Yeah.
And now I wouldn't be who I am today without them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that doesn't sound wild to me. It might sound wild to somebody listening, but yeah, I can
Like
understand.
I can't do I wouldn't be so
Yeah.
what makes me so good at my job is that a client doesn't have to just they don't have to explain anything. They don't have to explain one thing, you know?
Yeah.
And no, I didn't like live an Orthodox experience. No, I never wore LDS garments. No, I never got married in the temple, but I knew so many people who did. I watched my
Yeah.
mom wear her garments, right? Like I know it.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of the time, I hear it time and again, like, I'm so glad I don't need to explain that terminology. Like, I don't need to, help you understand or educate you. It's my biggest gripe in working with religious trauma is like clients not having to educate their therapists on that landscape in particular. Like, obviously, not, it's not about knowing everything, but it is not about expecting your clients to educate you as well. But even just you knowing the language and, it would put people at ease. Mormon culture has its own language as well, as in comparison to, evangelical Christianity or something like that. So I imagine even just something as simple as that would make a huge difference in people just being able to to sit with what they're, navigating as opposed to having to teach you alongside of sitting with what they're navigating. So, you mentioned feeling grounded in your spirituality and your identity, and one of my favorite questions to ask towards the end of these interviews is, where is your sense of spirituality now coming out of high control religion?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's so fascinating too because I am it's, I'm the most spiritual I've ever been since moving back to Utah, which is so ironic and funny like as I'm about to talk to you.
Yeah.
But I've always been so like right when I was still in college, I traveled I studied abroad in Ireland, and it was just like the immersion into the culture, and like that was my first evidence that spirituality was so much bigger than religion and that I could feel connected to a higher power just
Yeah.
in this culture out in nature. And so I've always kind of grounded in that from that time on, kind of like been open and curious. But I will say, in regulating my own nervous system, especially, and doing my own brain spotting work, I have such a sense of like something bigger than myself. I cannot explain it. I think also being a therapist, it's and I don't know, Sam, if this is your experience or not, but sometimes I'm like, why is everyone going through the same
Yes.
thing?
Oh my God.
Like,
I'm like, why am
why
I
am I
talking about the same thing this week?
yeah, and it's like,
Yes.
and the more I attune to that, I'm like, it's just collective. We are all collectively interconnected somehow that I can't explain.
Yeah.
And I don't need to explain it. I think that's like for me, what's been so spiritual is I'm okay with things being uncertain. I don't need an answer. I know that there are things bigger than myself. I mean, in brain spotting, I've brain spotted a lot of people who have lost loved ones,
Mm.
and sometimes these loved ones come up in their brain spotting process, and I feel it. Like I can't explain it to you, but I feel the chill. Like whether that's just my nervous system and their nervous system jiving, and there's energy, it's just they're unexplainable, beautiful moments where I feel so deeply connected to someone.
Mm.
That's spiritual. But spirituality for me has become like very simple. Spirituality is cuddling my kids in the morning. It's giving my husband a hug after work. It's sitting outside and like putting my feet, I love to put my feet on hot cement.
Mm.
Like, just like in the sun. I think that that's what shifted the most for me is like spirituality can be anywhere if we just like allow it to be and
Yeah.
we attune to it, like this conversation, like having a deep, meaningful conversation with someone.
Yeah.
And I think that has been the thing I've learned the most because I was always told this was the only way to be spiritual. This is the only way to feel joy and connected. And you have to have a relationship with Jesus or, whatever it is. And I actually disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think that those things can be absolutely spiritual and meaningful for people. I
Mm.
know that that's not spiritual and meaningful for me, you know give me a beach and like the waves, or let me go be at my like cabin that I grew up going to. Like those are really, really spiritual, powerful things for me. So I don't know if that answers. I think sometimes I'm like, people want me to tell them who my God is, and I just don't have one. Like I just know it's within me, Like I know that like spirituality is within me and I feel it and I can't always put it to words.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's why I love asking the question because the diversity of answers that I've gotten is so beautiful and is, in essence, the reason that I ask it in itself because spirituality or a connection to something, because for me, spirituality is just about connection, either to someone or something or, whatever it is so diverse and so unique to the individual that I think it's probably one of the most diverse answers that I've gotten from people in asking that question. And so I just think that that's in essence the reason also why I ask it. So yeah. I mean, I like to finish with some encouragement because people are obviously listening to this going, they might be relating, they might not be, they might be really far along in their journey, they might be listening, this might be the first episode they've ever listened to of a podcast. But I'm wondering if you can offer some encouragement for people who potentially are at the early stages of trying to work through that sexual and purity culture trauma.
The very first thing that comes up for me is well, I guess there's a few things. Like one, I just want to say keep going because I think there's so many times you want to quit on your journey and to keep going. But I know for me personally that, right, shame, I had lived with shame
Mm.
since I was like 3, 4 years old. So I had the opportunity multiple times to say what had happened, and I never did. I never felt safe enough to. So I'd carry the shame for like 20 years. And maybe a little less, but like when I finally found a safe person to tell, and it's my best friend, and when I finally told her,
Yeah.
just like that little bit of release that I had was enough, because shame, if shame stays inside of us, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until we finally talk about it, right? To a safe person, and not everyone's safe, and I know it's hard to find a safe person, and I totally get that, but I think that really starting to talk about it was the most powerful thing for me because I had decided if I just shoved it down, right? I shoved it down far enough, it wouldn't have to come out. I also I read The Courage to Heal, which is a very, very old book, but it outlines sexual trauma so masterfully. And I think it was the first book I read where I was like, oh my gosh, there's nothing wrong with me, right? Because I think so much when you grow up when you have sexual trauma and then you grow up in a purity culture that says all of these things make you impure, you genuinely believe something's wrong with you. So I think talking about it in safe spaces, informing yourself, getting like some good support systems and reading and books and community, right, for other people who have maybe gone through it, and to go really slow.
Yeah.
And like you're gonna fall down. Like I still fall down. You're gonna mess up. You're going to feel like it's not getting better.
Mm.
And to let that be a part of the process, right? None of us are going like this straight uphill climb. And I don't know anyone
No.
who does. And I think that it's going to be super messy and it's going to be super bumpy. But what I've learned the most is that those bumps and those darkest points, if I can like hold them,
Mm.
they're actually how I see the most light and love in myself.
Yeah.
Like letting the like and don't do it alone, like you don't have to like unpack and live in the darkness, but like it's not like holding space for the messy, I think is how you get here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Thanks.
Um, Thank you so much for joining me. I've loved this conversation. I think you're one of my most fun guests. Usually that falls to like the gay men that I've had on the podcast who are just like the funnest humans, but it's just like so nice, I think, talking to someone who like I don't, we can have conversations about really heavy and hard shit, but we don't need to like sit in the heavy and the hardness of that.
Yeah,
And so I like being able to have conversations that show that we can talk about this stuff, but also it doesn't have to feel heavy either. And
yeah.
laughter is healing as well. So,
Thank you. I do laugh a lot. And I think
yeah.
sometimes like maybe sometimes it's out of context, but it's been really helpful for me in understanding and healing. And I also want to say like I have done so much intentional work
Yeah.
to work through so much of this. I still brain spot on a like monthly, bi-weekly basis because my nervous system needs it. I'm going to a training. I've done so many trainings. Like, I'm super passionate about my own healing because I'm not going to ask a client to sit across from me and do it if I'm not doing it myself. And I think that's what allows me to show up here with you. It's what allows me to show up on my social media. It also allows me to be real and raw and true and honest because it's not about like I'm really not here for anyone else besides like what I want to represent and like help people heal from. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's, I sort of like to harp back to the beginning of the episode where I was like, I love your Instagram, but I think the authenticity that it comes out of the Instagram is the thing. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of great information out there and there's a lot of great accounts, but it doesn't mean that you connect with the human behind the account. You just like the information that they give out. And so I think the authenticity and like I said at the beginning, like you're just like a real human behind the screen shows through those posts. So if people haven't seen it, I mean, it will all be in the show notes, but so people don't need to necessarily go there. What is your Instagram handle?
My Instagram handle is ashleyb_therapy. And I want to preface that I was not a content creator. I opened my practice in 2022.
Yeah.
I had this like little Instagram to market. And then last summer in June of 2024, I had a post go viral.
Yes.
And now here we are. And it's been a journey and I have stumbled a lot along the way, but I'm going to cherish that compliment because my goal and hope is always to be my authentic self. And sometimes that means I'm really messy.
Yeah.
You know.
Still great. We love the mess. Well, I love the mess.
Well, I really appreciate it because I'm very messy. I'm a little out, like I do push, like I push the lines.
Yeah.
I get a lot of criticism for it, and I honestly am not just I think one of my really good friends who's a therapist, she's like, you're just not afraid to say it how it is. And I'm like, because that's how we got here, right? Nobody's ever said it how it was.
Yeah.
I certainly thought it growing up in the church, like this is kind of weird, right?
Yep.
But you never let me say it. Weird shit was just normalized by the adults in your life. And I've really started to embrace that. If I would have had someone like me when I was younger, if social media would have been a thing and I would have been able to see this, I don't think I would have suffered to the degree that I suffered, Sam.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's for all of social media's faults and issues, there is a long list of those. There is also the power in seeing someone mirror something to you on a screen in a real way that, feels like it speaks directly to you in a non spiritual, religious, divine moment, but just in like a human connection kind of way.
Yeah.
So I love that. And thank you again for joining me and sharing so vulnerably and openly.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor just to chat with you and be on this podcast. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.